MIT opened its doors to the world in 1861. In 1880, Keshav Bhatt found his way there, becoming the first South Asian student at the institute. India was a colony at the time, ruled by the British. Discontent with the empire and left behind by the Industrial Revolution, nationalists aspiring for independence recognized that education and technical skills were vital to make India a modern nation, free in every sense, economically, politically, and socially. Bal Gangadhar Tilak, a freedom fighter, emphatically endorsed this view in his widely circulated paper, Maratha. Remarkably, within just 2 decades of its founding, Tilak proclaimed that MIT was a model technical institute and the place where Indians could acquire the knowledge they needed to become free. After Keshav Bhatt, a steady trickle of South Asians began to be admitted to MIT. The institute was unique not only in its focus on technical education, but had the largest number of international students of any American university at the time. These pioneering men were deeply influenced by Tilak and Mahatma Gandhi's call for Swadeshi as the first step towards self-governance. These anti-colonial leaders urged Indians to boycott British-manufactured goods and colonial educational institutions in favor of nationalist ones. The establishment of Indian-owned and managed businesses and universities was vital to this movement for independence. Students from India came to MIT for an education that would equip them with the engineering and scientific skills they needed to build their nation back home. Birendra Chandra Gupta, the very first Indian to receive an undergraduate degree from the institute, returned to India in 1911. Refusing to work at British-owned companies, Gupta found employment in the princely state of Kashmir, where he worked as an assistant engineer at a power transmission substation in Srinagar. He later took up a faculty position at Bengal Engineering College in Howrah. An outspoken critic of colonial rule, Gupta returned to MIT in 1922. In an interview to the Boston Daily Globe, he stated that Indians would soon take back home rule from the British. Another nationalist, Trikamal Mansukh Lal Shah, joined MIT as a sophomore, having already graduated in mathematics from Fergusson College. Shah had also taught at Gujarat Vidyapeeth, a national university set up by Mahatma Gandhi in 1920. Shah returned to India in 1931 and worked as an electrical engineer at the Indian-owned Tata Iron and Steel Company. A lifelong Gandhian, Shah, along with Nandlal Shah, another MIT alum, was arrested by the British in 1932 for their involvement in organizing a workers' strike during the Civil Disobedience Movement, a protest launched by the Indian National Congress to demand independence. The arrest of the Shahs made headline news at MIT, which by the late 1930s was home to dozens of increasingly vocal young nationalists who brought their anti-colonial politics to campus. In 1946, the British Information Service sponsored an exhibition on India in Building 7, which claimed that European and Indian soldiers received equal pay in the British Army. Indian students mounted a public protest against this lie, which they considered a deliberate insult to them. They pointed out that even as independence was imminent in their homeland, the exhibition amounted to colonial propaganda that glossed over the racial inequalities of British rule. In response, John Burchard, then head of libraries and later the first dean of the School of Humanities, Arts and Social Sciences, agreed and issued an apology. A year later, in August 1947, India and Pakistan became independent new nations, and MIT's South Asian engineers, scientists, and architects were handpicked by their governments to oversee the large infrastructural development that their countries embarked upon. Dr. Ram Prasad, the first Indian graduate student at MIT's School of Science, was appointed the chief engineer of the Koyna hydroelectric plant by the government of Maharashtra in the early 1950s. This was India's first underground hydropower facility and remains the largest hydroelectric power source in the country till today. H. Abdul Razak, the first South Asian Muslim at the Institute, returned to India shortly before independence, where he served as Chief Technical Industrial Advisor to the Nizam of Hyderabad. In 1947, he became Chief of Industries in the Planning Commission, an institute set up by the Government of India to oversee the nation's economic and infrastructural development. Habibur Rahman, the very first South Asian graduate of MIT's School of Architecture and Planning, became one of India's most prominent architects. He led India's Central Works Department in building institutions of governance, education, justice, and culture to cater to the many needs of the newly independent nation, including providing low-cost housing to millions of refugees who had arrived in India in the aftermath of partition in 1947. The 1950s and 60s saw a period of radical change and nation building in South Asia and America. The Prime Ministers of India and Pakistan, Jawaharlal Nehru and Liaquat Ali Khan, looked to MIT as a guide and partner in the challenging work of decolonization that lay ahead of them. They visited the institute in 1949 and 1950. These trips culminated in several close and successful collaborations between MIT and scientific and educational institutions in South Asia, including the Indian Institute of Technology at Kanpur, the Indian Institute of Management in Kolkata, and the Institute of Science and Technology in Islamabad. At the same time, America was emerging from nearly half a century of racial discrimination against immigrants, particularly those from Asia who had been banned from the US under the 1917 Immigration Act. Before its passing, a small number of South Asians had come to America and naturalized as US citizens. Among them were Vaishno Bagai and Noni Gopal Bose, whose sons Madan Bagai and Amar Gopal Bose were the first South Asian Americans to attend MIT. Both their fathers were anti-colonial revolutionaries who sought political refuge in America. Born a generation apart, their stories are a somber reminder that then, as now, the South Asian presence at MIT is inextricably entangled within a broader historical context of immigration, race, and nation building in America. Like several other Indians, Vaishno Bagai naturalized in 1921 on the grounds of being Caucasian. His citizenship was revoked 2 years later when a 1923 US Supreme Court ruling deemed Indians non-white. This resulted in the denaturalization of more than 50 American citizens of South Asian origin, depriving them not only of citizenship but also their property. In 1928, Bagai took his own life as a mark of protest against the humiliation and insults that he had suffered both in India and America. His son, Madan Bagai, came to MIT in 1933, the first South Asian American to do so, and one of only 3 South Asians at the institute at the time. Unable to find employment after graduating in the anti-Asian atmosphere of the 1930s, Bagai left for India, an involuntary return to his father's homeland that ended in tragedy. Another 2 decades passed before MIT admitted a second South Asian American, Amar Gopal Bose, to its incoming undergraduate class. Born in Philadelphia in 1929, he joined MIT in 1947, the year of India's independence, and a year after the Luce Celler Act started to reopen America to immigrants from South Asia. In 1955, Bose was appointed Assistant Professor of Electrical Engineering, becoming the first South Asian member of MIT's faculty. He went on to establish the extraordinarily successful Bose Corporation, gifting the majority of the company's share to the institute. Like Madan Bagai, Bose also visited India after graduating. His was a South Asian American's journey of self-discovery that he was encouraged to undertake by his mentor at MIT, Professor Norbert Wiener, who told him, "You have to know where you came from to know where you are going." So, Bose stepped foot in India for the very first time in 1956. Both the MIT he came from and the India he arrived in were in stark contrast to Madan Bagai. When Amar Gopal Bose arrived at the institute as an undergraduate, he was one of 35 South Asians at MIT. In his junior year, he received a personal invitation from MIT's president, James Killian, to a reception to welcome the Indian Prime Minister, Jawaharlal Nehru, to the institute. 5 years later, Bose won a Fulbright scholarship to spend a year in India at the Indian Statistical Institute that was headed by Professor P.C. Mahalanobis, a prominent member of the Indian Planning Commission. The India Amar Bose experienced was surging ahead to stake its claim on the world stage. The America Bose came from and the MIT he returned to were doing the same. Immigration reforms, including the US Immigration Act of 1965, paved the way for the large-scale immigration of highly skilled scientists, engineers, and social scientists to come to America. The majority of these immigrants were graduates from South Asia's newly established institutions of higher learning, many of whom found their way to MIT. Since then, South Asians and students and faculty with a research interest in South Asia have been an active and large presence in all 5 of MIT's schools. They have been at the forefront of technical revolutions, entrepreneurial innovations, and academic excellence across the world. MIT's South Asians have not only changed the demographic composition of the institute, but they have pushed MIT to develop new programs and adapt to a changing but increasingly interconnected world. The institute's past and present has been shaped as much by these South Asian students and faculty as their time at MIT has opened new personal and professional horizons for their future both in America and South Asia. South Asia and the Institute makes these transformative connections visible.